Hey everyone, welcome to the Being Patient podcast. I'm Deborah Kahn, founder of Being Patient. When my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, I decided to use my skills as a journalist in a different way. Frustrated by the lack of information on science and the inability to get different expert opinions, I decided to quit my job at the Wall Street Journal to create a better platform for people impacted by dementia. We are a community where news and information is created by our team of journalists. We ask tough questions and we simplify the science so that anyone can understand. We don't only cover disease, but delve into the latest research on what it takes to keep our brains healthy. We invite the experts and ask your questions. Here's today's podcast. I hope you enjoy it. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Being Patient Perspectives, a segment where we take a first-person look about what it's like to live with dementia. Today, joining us is Lonni Schicker. She was diagnosed with both Lewy body and early-onset Alzheimer's at the same time and joins us now from St. Louis. Lonni, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to start, of course, with diagnosis because, a lot of people who have dementia are misdiagnosed. And so when I heard that you had both been diagnosed with Lewy body and also Alzheimer's disease, I was frankly quite surprised because most people don't get both of those diagnoses so early on. So tell us a little bit about how you were diagnosed.
Well, originally I was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, and it kind of stayed there for a while. When I was visiting my neurologist, we could see that progressively I was having some symptoms like tremors and visual hallucinations. The visual hallucinations were increasing. And I was having also, the forgetfulness and the word finding issues. And so my physician and the neuropsych testing physician both felt that my symptoms were more consistent with Lewy body dementia. And then with Lewy body dementia, often there's an accompanying Parkinsonism, which is not Parkinson's, but it's a syndrome that's Parkinson's-like.
Meaning
tremor, right? I'm sorry?
Meaning that you have tremors?
I have tremors and a little bit of shuffling gait and a little bent over, so those kinds of things.
Well, we have been told that actually Lewy body is closely related to Parkinson's in the way it presents itself. So in that respect, I guess those symptoms aren't too surprising. But right. I should have pointed out that you're a former professor of healthcare management, and you were working at the time. So tell us a little bit about how you noted, before your diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, how you noted that something was wrong.
Well, I personally could tell that something was off, but I thought I was really stressed. I was running the department by myself. I had just written a master's program and had students that it far exceeded. We were hoping for 12. We ended up with like 30 for the first go around. So I felt really overwhelmed. But I also noticed that I couldn't remember where we left off in the last class, and I would have to ask my students. And so I really did kind of chalk it up to stress until my students actually called a meeting with me. And they told me that I hadn't shown up for several classes and that I hadn't returned any assignments. And so I tore my office apart and actually found their assignments like between books and couldn't even remember ever having them in my possession. And so I called my physician and said, there's just something off.
So you weren't cognizant of the fact that you weren't showing up for class?
I did not know. I had no idea that I hadn't shown up. And even because it was one of those classes, it was a hybrid. And so we did part of it online and part of it in the classroom. And so when they first told me, I thought, well, maybe I just wrote the schedule wrong, the schedule that I gave to them. And then the more I talked to them, the more I realized that I just really hadn't shown up and hadn't even given it a thought. I had no idea I was supposed to be there.
I mean, I can imagine that's terrifying.
I was so apologetic. I felt awful, but at the same time, I realized that my perception that there was something off was real.
So when you were, how long were you given the mild cognitive impairment diagnosis before you realized it could be either Lewy body or Alzheimer's?
Well, actually, I went to a neurophysiologist after I had the neuropsych testing originally, which was in 2014, late 2014. And the neurophysiologist told me that he had no doubt that this was an early development of Alzheimer's. Just some of the things that came up in my testing, the way my brain looked on imaging, that he really felt confident in saying that this was something that was going to progress. And
did they
so
see plaques when you say the way that the imaging was? What did they see exactly?
they saw a great deal of diffuse white plaques and large white plaques, which, take up brain space. And so that was an issue. And then they also saw like areas of white plaques in the places where it most affects memory and cognition, and that there was more there than in other parts of my brain.
So when you were diagnosed with Lewy body, and I have to say, that it is very rare to have both diagnoses at this early stage that you're in. It's usually people find out down the road, or it's discovered post-mortem that there may have been more than one dementia. So it's rare to be dealing with two different, even though they are in similar in presentation, but yet there's differences. So tell us a little bit about how Lewy body came to you, what you noted, and how the doctors actually diagnosed. What was the difference there?
It was very interesting, but it was actually my son. My son did a lot of research about dementia because he felt when he went through the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, he really felt that it was a kind of like having on a tight shoe. It wasn't completely comfortable to him that that was the diagnosis. And so as he researched, he looked at Lewy body and he said, I can check every box on this list. And so he actually contacted the neurologist and said, we would like to come in and talk to you about this. And he went through line by line the symptoms that I had related to the symptoms in this article. And the article was actually from the, I can't remember the publication, but it's the neuropsychiatric publication. And so as my physician, Dr. Backett, went through it, he agreed that, this is a very likely scenario as we look at symptoms. And then when I started having the tremors, he felt that pretty concretely he could say that that this was Lewy body. I think what he wasn't expecting was for the dementia to increase significantly, and for my I can't write anymore and I can't read. I can't do numbers. So you can imagine for a former professor, this is like overwhelming. But that's what kind of started leading him to the additional diagnosis of Alzheimer's.
So when you say, I want to go back to Lewy body in a second, but when you say you can't read or write, I mean, obviously you've been reading and writing for, most of your life. So right. What is that like? Was it just like you woke up one day and you suddenly forgot how to read and write, or how did it present itself?
No, at first it was perception. Like I used to read at least 2 books a week. I used to treat myself if I read one nonfiction, I'd get to read a fiction. So I was obsessed with reading. And suddenly I realized that I had to keep going back to figure out who people were. And then when I would read, letters would look like out of position, or some letters would look like numbers and some numbers would look like letters. And so I started getting more and more of this kind of difficulty in remembering and reading clearly. And so I had to give up reading books and I started listening to books, which has been helpful. But then one day I was at a pharmacy and I handed money to her and she was like, well, this is way too much. And I realized that I had lost my ability to count. And so I can't count money. When I go anywhere, I have to have someone else count the money for me.
Just many presentations, many people, what surprised me at least, especially with, I have a mom with Alzheimer's, and one thing that surprised me is the presentation of symptoms of the disease. And I always thought when she was first diagnosed, it would be a slippery slope downhill. But I realized the presentation is more up and down in increments, right? So some days we say, wow, she's doing really well today. And other days we say, oh, wow, it really feels like she's slipping. So when you talk about these types of presentations, like when you lost the ability to count, is it better some days but worse others, or what is that like?
And honestly, some days I can absolutely figure out money. It was really funny because my son said to me the other day, he was trying to figure out something. We were working on holiday gifts. And he said something to me about the cost. And I said, well, that would be like 75 cents cheaper only. So, and he looked at me and I looked at him and I said, where in the heck did that come from? But then other times when I go to the store, I can't even tell a 1 from a 20 from, and I definitely couldn't work with change. So it is peaks and valleys. Sometimes it feels like running up and down stairs. I feel pretty with it some days, and there are other days. This is a good day. There are other days where I can't remember anything.
I want to talk a little bit about the Lewy body portion of this because, we've interviewed experts on Lewy body, Dag Arslan being one out of the UK from University College London. And he believes that Lewy body is probably one of the most underdiagnosed dementias because most doctors aren't equipped to understand how to diagnose it, what the difference of symptoms are. What he elaborated on was the hallucinations. One key clue is the hallucinations come early with Lewy body. Did you have that type of symptom? And if so, can you tell us a little bit about it?
The hallucinations were the first thing that really, I think, tipped my physician off and me. I was startled the first time I had one. In fact, I spent 6 months in the hospital because I tripped over a dog in my kitchen that wasn't there. When I see things, I see them very clearly. It's not like, like you see on TV and mystery movies where it's kind of like a waft in the air. I mean, I really see things very clearly.
So it's not like a cartoon caricature hallucination. It's more
Correct.
like real life, like you're seeing an animal that looks exactly like an animal.
Right. When I see it, and I don't just see it, I have the impression of it first. Like I feel like there's something there, and then it becomes visual. And I have some that are very frightening. I've had, in fact, someone standing in my kitchen who's trying to talk to me, but I can't hear them. And I become very frightened because I know they're trying to say something to me, and and what are you doing in my kitchen late at night? It's really terrifying. And sometimes I don't know what's real and what's not. My son and I were in the car, and I thought a car was coming directly at us, and I yelled. And my son said, "There's nothing there." I was terrified. My heart was pounding. I thought someone was going to hit us.
How often does that occur?
I would say a couple of times a week. Um, a couple of times a week that I actually see things. The impression that something is near me or going by me is a frequent, like multiple times a day occurrence.
Is there anything that helps? Is there medication? Is there, or have you associated any triggers with those type of hallucinations, or do they just descend upon you very unexpectedly?
They're very random, and any medication that they've tried has not helped. I don't sleep well because of it, because I get kind of, frankly, creeped out and I can't sleep well. And so they've tried sleeping medications, they've tried anti-anxiety medications, they've tried the traditional um, Alzheimer's medications, and nothing has really made a difference. I will say that the medication that they give me for the Parkinsonism has been very helpful. I don't tremor near as much, and so I'm really grateful for that.
And in fact, that was one of the reasons when we asked the expert on Lewy body, well, why does it really matter if you are diagnosed with Lewy body or Alzheimer's? And he gave exactly that answer, because some of the Parkinson drugs actually work much better on Lewy body than they would on Alzheimer's disease. And so they wouldn't be necessarily prescribed to somebody with Alzheimer's, but most people with Lewy body have some sort of Parkinsonian symptoms, and those medications tend to alleviate the Parkinson symptoms.
Correct. Yeah, it definitely has for me.
So you're able to articulate so well what is happening to you. Do you feel like, I mean, and you know, do you feel like you're declining, or do you feel like you're observing changes in your brains? Do you know what I mean by that? Because
I do know exactly what you mean.
I'm speaking to you and I'm like, and I know I'm not with you 24 hours a day, and I know I don't live with you, and I'm sure there are things that would become more apparent if we were together more. But as we have this conversation, I'm thinking to myself, you can articulate so well what's happening to you. So tell me a little bit about that perspective on having these types of dementia.
I think, first of all, I think that my scientific nurse brain is constantly monitoring what's going on with me. And so I'm very aware of changes. I feel like I've been declining more over the past 6 months than all the time previously. Um, I have days that are really awful, days that I can't articulate very much. And then I have days, and it's interesting. I can go out and speak to a group, and sometimes it's very fluid, and I do it from memory, and it's very fluid. And other days, I can be sitting at home and can hardly hold a phone conversation. So I see that back and forth, but I do almost feel like, my brain's tingling, like I can feel that there's something going on up there. I feel different, but I don't know that I necessarily, or that other people necessarily see the decline. But I will say that the other day I was with some friends, and one of my friends said, hey, when do you see your doctor again? Because I've noticed these couple of things.
What did he share?
Um, Keeping track of the date and keeping track of a date. This has been a big problem for me. I literally keep a book at my side all the time now, so I can write appointments and all of those kinds of things. And she said, I guess she told me a day that we were going to do something, which was coming up soon. And she said that I asked her repeatedly what date that was, and then finally made her write it down, because I guess I couldn't actually write the date. I couldn't get the numbers in order. So I had to actually ask her to write it. And so she was very concerned about that.
We're getting a number of comments about your self-awareness and people complimenting you on how you are indeed so self-aware. We have one comment coming through from a viewer saying, "My husband doesn't seem to be aware like you are, or if he is, he can't express his symptoms to me. His language is disappearing." From your perspective, do you have advice in terms of better ways to communicate?
There are a couple of better. The first thing is if you feel pushed to articulate something, it becomes more difficult. It's kind of there's kind of a reverse effect there, at least for me. Anytime I feel like I'm kind of cornered into, I need to be able to get this out, and I feel like somebody really wants me to get it out, that it becomes harder to do. And I think one thing is I express myself better through like drawing things, or um, um, drawing is a really good example, but I also express myself through, unfortunately, crying. I get upset about something, I get frustrated. And my son has become I live with my son, so that's why I speak about him a lot. He's become very adept at kind of listing things calmly. Is it this that you want? Is it this that you need? And not like, what's going on? So I think one of the things is to approach them kind of as gently as you would approach a lamb. You just have to kind of ask them calmly, is this it? Is this? And if you don't get an answer, and you can't figure it out, you do have to kind of unfortunately let it go, because if they can't express themselves and you can't figure out what the problem is, you're just both going to become very frustrated.
That makes a lot of sense, because any one of us, when we're put on the spot, we get more nervous and more tense. And right. So I can imagine if you're trying to get words out or remember what you were trying to say, to be put on under the spotlight and pressured, it would only make it worse. I mean, that's pretty normal, I would say. Yeah. We have a few more questions coming in. Another viewer is asking, do you feel a lack of motivation or lack of desire to do things, which is a common symptom with Alzheimer's disease? Has that happened to you?
It does happen all the time. And right now, I really push myself to stay active. I speak a lot. I speak all over the country. And I think that helps me a lot, just that planning and knowing that that's going to happen and getting ready for it kind of keeps me going. But as it's becoming more difficult to travel and to speak publicly, because traveling by myself is a real issue, it's very difficult. And so as that has become more of a problem, it's kind of not motivating me so much. And my tendency is to want to quit things. So anything that I'm doing, I say frequently, I can't do this anymore. I'm just going to stop doing it. I'm going to stop volunteering. I'm going to stop speaking. And it's usually my friends. I have several close friends who, with my son, consider themselves my care team, and they will keep me going. They'll travel with me if they have to. They'll do whatever they need to do to keep me active and busy.
And as we know, staying socially engaged is really helpful.
It is.
Another viewer is asking if you get anxiety because of the hallucinations. I can imagine they're terrifying. Do they make you panic? Do you get anxiety attacks?
I get terrible anxiety attacks, and when I see something and no one else is home to validate that it's not there, I have panic attacks and anxiety attacks, and I have palpitations, I get sweaty, I'm afraid, I go outside, like trying to get away from whatever it is, and then I'll keep peeking in the house to see if it's gone. So yes, it's the anxiety is horrible, and I think I said earlier, I can't sleep well because I'm afraid that there's going to be something there when I open my eyes again. So it's easier just not to close them. And the absolute absurdity of that, even though for me it's very real, but lack of sleep, we know, can cause hallucinations. You ask any nurse that's worked 24 hours straight and then drives home how many animals she sees out of the corner of her eye. Sleep deprivation creates some hallucinations, or can. And so I feel like, if I get too tired, I have them, but I can't sleep because I have them. So it's very frustrating and anxiety provoking for sure.
Are you, someone is asking if they're saying, Lonnie, you must be a jewel to the Lewy Body research team. What they're learning, what are they learning the most from you, especially since you're so lucid? Are you participating in research, and are you giving feedback? Because I'm finding this incredibly informative to listen to your perspective of living with dementia. We find that with a lot of these interviews that we're doing. So, is there some way you're participating in the research?
I am not, and I have signed up multiple times. I've been excluded because of the kind of mixed diagnosis. That's been an issue, and the fact that I'm diabetic, which is something that I'm very interested in. Because I have had difficulty controlling my blood sugar. And I noticed even on your website, there's a lot of interesting information about the relationship between blood sugar and Alzheimer's. That really is honestly the research I would like to be involved in, because I have always felt that there was a connection there.
Are you diabetes type 2 or type 1?
I'm a type 2.
Yeah, and that's the one that's so closely associated with, or at least severely elevating your risk of dementia.
Correct.
With diabetes type 2. From your perspective, have doctors talked to you about maybe the relationship between diabetes and dementia? Does that ever come up when you see your doctors?
Nobody ever brings it up except one emergency room physician. I was in the emergency room actually for something unrelated, but when they checked my blood sugar because of the infection, it was elevated. And he said, has any of your physicians ever told you that these two could be related? I've been reading a lot of articles. And until then, I hadn't really given it much thought, but now I listen to a lot and make my son read to me a lot of articles that he can find about the relationship. It seems very closely tied, and I feel like there could definitely be a connection, because my blood sugar, despite my best efforts and my physician's best efforts, have never really been in tight control.
Yeah. It's interesting as we, hear from more and more experts. There's more and more view that Alzheimer's is treating a host of symptoms, not just one target, right? And so how are these all interrelated? We're not 100% sure yet. But blood sugar is one that could possibly, through recent research, be a trigger. So, Lonnie, give us insight about. I know you've now turned. You have two hats because you're very familiar with the healthcare system through your work, and you were also a nurse, so you understand healthcare. And now you are looking at things from a patient perspective. So tell us what you think people need to know about living with Alzheimer's or dementia, for that matter.
I think the first thing is it was not difficult. I was diagnosed at 58. So with the mild cognitive impairment, it was not difficult to be on or to get disability. The problem is, once you get disability, the nightmare begins. It becomes more and more difficult to receive health care because Medicare, there's an 18-month waiting period. So there's a 6-month waiting period for you to begin disability, an additional 18 months to get your Medicare. And what happens is you either have to rely on a spouse's insurance, you have to go to only clinics, and the realistic the reality is that clinics are designed. They're almost like miniature emergency rooms. They're really designed to take care of immediate problems and not ongoing issues. And so you pay for a lot of your care out of pocket. So I think the first thing is the financial burden. You just have no idea what the cost is going to be until you're in it. And then my son has been looking at placement for the future, and the cost of placement is incredibly unattainable for most people. And so I think that the thing that I talk about most often is being prepared to have Alzheimer's no matter what your age, to think about what the cost is going to be and to have that money put away. It seems outrageous to tell a 30-year-old that, this could happen to you. And so you need to have, you need to be diligent about your savings because this will break you.
Yeah.
It took my entire 401k. I had no money left. And for a person who was making a 6-figure income to now have zero money in the bank was overwhelming.
But it feels like there's some bankruptcy, right? Because you need to spend down. Don't you have to spend down your retirement and everything so that you can qualify for Medicaid?
Right.
Which in so many ways doesn't make sense. But
it doesn't make sense at all because you're using up your money in order to get government funding, but then you go to Medicare and you no longer have any money in the bank.
Yeah.
So it's really an awful, it's funny, when I was teaching, I used to say all the time, despite all its faults, it's still the best healthcare system in the world. And there are clinics and everyone can receive healthcare if they need it. And I have discovered how unfair the system is. And I think that that's the thing that has startled me the most, is that I feel like I was living in kind of a cloud of what I was told and taught and not the real world.
Yeah. So we have just one last question. And one viewer is asking, do you know what stage you were at the time of diagnosis and what stage you're at now?
I'm still early stage. Some of my symptoms lately over the last, I would say 3 to 6 months, are indicating that I am likely moving into a middle stage. I know a lot of people, I'm on committees with so many people who are early stage, and they all are saying the same thing. Since we all kind of started at the same time, we're kind of progressing together. And they're all saying that one day they feel like they've already hit middle stage, that their memory is so awful, but that they kind of bounce back and feel like, okay, maybe I'm still early. And that's kind of where I am. I think I'm between those two stages right now.
Well, we really wish you all the luck. And, we so appreciate your perspective. I think it's enormously important to look at dementia from the first person perspective, because you can really educate all of us, whether you're a caregiver, someone impacted by the disease, or, have a loved one, or even a researcher for that matter. So we really value your perspective, and thank you for sharing with us.
I appreciate that. I am always thrilled to be able to help educate people, and I'm so happy that I had this opportunity.
Thank you. And if you missed any of this interview, you can go to beingpatient.com. We always have these interviews on our site on demand. And, if you have any more questions for Lonnie, please don't hesitate to leave them on our Facebook chat, which you're on now watching. Leave it in the comments section, and we'll be sure to pass it along. Thanks so much, Lonnie, and we will continue with more of these interviews and keep updated with what we're doing on either our Facebook page or on beingpatient.com. Thanks very much for watching. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. For more information on upcoming interviews, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at beingpatient.com. That's beingpatient.com. And send us any feedback you may have, whether it's someone you want us to interview or any comment about our podcast series. You can do so by emailing info@beingpatient.com. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'm Deborah Kahn.